G'day. Welcome everyone to this online Microsoft Immersion 2020 conference. I'm Adrian and we've got Morgan here as well.
Hey everybody, I'm very excited to be here.
We are super excited. We've been working on this in the background for a few months now, so now it's lovely to have it live and good. We've got Travis Smith about to jump on and do his keynote in just a sec. But just a few housekeeping things before we get rolling, just so that you know how we're rolling and what's going on. So you might have caught up on the news that Sean couldn't make it today, so we've got Travis instead. Travis has jumped in, taken his jammies off, and just jumped in deep end, ready to go for this keynote. So we're really looking forward to that. We chatted with him this morning, and it looks like it's going to be a great session. So for you, who you've got on your left-hand side of your screen, you've got your session times, you've got all the things that you need to be able to see to jump into, you've got your networking, you've got your expo, but the times we're going to be sticking to are like this. So we're going to be fairly tight with our times because we just need to roll through. But just make sure that you jump into the sessions that you want to and have a look at what's going on. Everything that we do today is going to be sent to you in a OneNote notebook. So you guys can take it and grab it and run with it as you go. Couple of things. If you ever want to find out what's going on, all you do is you click on the reception button on the right-hand side, on your left-hand side, sorry, it's on the right-hand side of my screen, on the left-hand side of your screen, and that'll take you to like a running sheet of what's going on and how things are going to be. The main stage, it kicks off, and that's what we're rolling out there. So the main stage is where you are at the moment, and just a massive reminder that if you want to be in to win one of the prizes that we've got floating around, you need to come back to the main stage at 6:35, and then Morgan and I will be there, and we're going to show you and present to you the winners who are going to get those prizes. We're going to put everyone into a lucky dip, and we're going to pull everyone's names out. To be in the prize to win it, you need to go to a workshop and fill out one of the survey forms at the end, and then you'll get the survey stuff and you'll be ready to go. Super excited about that. Some really good prizes. The sessions are going to go rolling through, and a couple of things about the sessions as well. Sorry, Morgan, I'm chatting and you're just sitting there smiling. The way the sessions work is that you'll jump into a session and you click on the screen, and if you double click on the area that you want to look at, it will blow bigger and the presenter will become smaller on your screen. You don't have to ask to chat. You don't have to ask to present in a workshop, but if you want to chat to anything, on the right-hand side will be a chat column, and you can chat away with any other participant in that session, which will be really cool. Now, the networking session is really nice and fun as well, kind of like speed dating. 3-minute window where you can jump into networking, bump into someone, have a conversation. If you want to, you can change and exchange your details, which is really cool. Or if you want to just look out for the UTB person, there'll be 2 people floating around, Paul and Julia. They'll be wearing something slightly odd and different. And if you bump into them in the networking sessions, you'll be given a prize, and they'll take your name and you'll be awarded a prize. Pretty cool prizes, some headphones and some free courses from UTB as well. And last thing is we've got these vendors in our that are in the expo session, and they've got some really great stuff to show you that you can take back into your schools and your workplaces. So really pop into there, have a mosey around, see what's there. It's just a fantastic spot to be in. Really, really cool indeed, which is just absolutely wonderful that we have so many fantastic vendors here at the same time. At the end, whoops, let's go up to here. At the end of the sessions today, what's going to happen is that you'll get a email and a link to a OneNote notebook, and that'll have all the resources and everything you need to look at into what's going on in our sessions, and also all the resources that the workshop people have given you as well. 2 more slides, and then I'm going to throw to Morgan, and she's going to introduce Travis to you. So first thing, if you are interested in the Education Transformation Framework, which is a really great way to really reflect and develop your school and plan a really efficient way of moving forward, please jump onto this URL, utb.fyi/ETFNZ, and you'll be given some more information about that, which is really, really cool. The other thing, while we're here as well, is if you've ever really wanted to feel more confident in using tech, that's probably why you're here at this conference, in your workplace, please let us help you. We'd like to take you on that journey. And we've got a whole lot of online courses, learning on demand courses. Once again, if you punch that URL into your browser, you'll get taken to a page that shows you everything that's on offer. We'd love to help you to remove that angst that you have if you're using tech as you kind of are moving in your workplace and doing things. So what I'd like to do now is just throw to Morgan, and Morgan's just going to have a bit of a intro to Travis, and then we're going to throw to Travis, and then we'll jump straight into the event. thank you once again for all turning up. It's so good that you're here in this virtual world. I can see the chat going, which is great. Feel free to chat all the way through this, build up those relationships and make friends with other people who you might not see for a long time. So let me just stop sharing my screen for a sec and jump back into here. And you can throw to Morgan.
Thank you, Adrian, for that little bit of housekeeping. So I'm really excited to introduce to you Travis Smith this afternoon. Travis is joining us all the way from Australia, and Travis brings such a wealth of knowledge and experience from the education sector, having been both an assistant principal and a lecturer at the Faculty of Education at Monash University. So in Travis's role at the moment, he is the K-12 education industry lead for Microsoft, and he works extensively with schools and educators and school leaders around Australia and helping them integrate digital technologies to transform their teaching and learning programs. So Travis, I'm going to hand over for you, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to share with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Morgan and Adrian and the whole U2B team. And Sean sends his apologies. Very, very crook at the moment, so I'll check in on him later in the day, but he sent his apologies that he couldn't be here. So my background is really in education, and my focus is really about education. We know that I think it's probably fair to say that we'd give 2020 a 1-star review. It's been a tough year. It's probably been a bit tougher in Australia than has New Zealand, given the initial lockdowns that you experienced over there. And then in Australia, specifically around Victoria, where I live, we're sort of just re-emerging now from a second wave. So hopefully you don't have to experience that. But although there's been some challenges, what I wanted to spend some time focusing on today are what are the possibilities? What are the positives? What are the good things to come out of this? What are the new realities, if you like, about what we might experience? Now, that come in various flavors. There's new economic realities. For example, we know that many independent schools' business model is and may need to change a little bit. We know that in universities, especially in Australia, without the influx of international students at university for Australia is our 3rd largest export, behind our resources, our minerals, and so forth. So we know that there's some other realities. We know that there's been workforce reality changes too as a result of the pandemic and what's been going on. But really what we want to focus on is what are these new education realities? What are some of the things that we can reflect on out of this and take forward? And so we commissioned a paper here with the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning team, which includes Michael Fullan, who some of you will know is a bit of a guru around educational leadership and system change globally. And one of the things was that they were really trying to unpack what actually happened to schools, what happened to education during this lockdown phase, and then moving into the 3rd phase there. The first phase is disruption, which was that period when we all sort of went, oh, we've got to go remote. How do we do this? Trying to stand up technology, trying to work out what our pedagogy was going to be like, work out how our curriculum was going to go online, doing immense amounts of training and so forth. Second part was that reopening of schools, transitioning back into face-to-face learning. And the third part, which is really the most interesting for us and really a reflection of what this presentation today is about what can we reimagine as a result of what we've learned? And so what are the possibilities now that we could take forward into the future, given what we experienced in that period of remote learning? And so there are some real positives, and I just want to talk about some of those today. One of the ones is that well-being, we know that it's a critical precondition for learning, but we experienced in a big way, especially in Victoria, where there was a lockdown for an extended period of time. Most of the students in Victoria have really only been at school about 2 months of this year. And they're now sort of about to wrap up for the end of the year. So we know that well-being stuff is really hard to manage when you're using remote learning tools and when you're teaching over distance. We also know that technology shifted from being just a mechanism for presenting stuff, which is kind of like the the lowest level of remote learning, if you like, which is just a screen share and a video. But if you're really truly doing a big learning experience with kids in a long ongoing sort of experience, you need to have something like Teams or whatever wrapped around that to allow for the collaborative experience, for the shared document experience, for the video recording experience, the single pane of glass view of what learning looks like. And so we know that, education's often difficult to change, and technology sort of forges ahead without a problem in the world, but education's kind of tough. And so when we think about the reimagining phase and moving forward, if a learning revolution is going to occur, Michael Fullan and co talk about there's two different requirements for that to occur. One is the opportunity or a reflection on our current system and wondering whether that is actually fit for purpose. And we know there's a lot of work from researchers and presenters globally around the state of our existing education systems and whether they are more factory model than they are learning model. And so the second one here is what we've experienced during the lockdowns, what we've experienced during this pandemic, which is we've kind of got a glimpse at a viable alternative model. And that is the idea that maybe we can be focused differently on the way our school operates. I was just talking to a school from Sydney, and they did 2-1-2 as their model during remote learning, which is 2 days of intensive learning, 1 day of social emotional well-being sort of activities in the middle, and then 2 days of intense learning when they were remote. Now, it's that kind of thinking, you wonder whether we might take some of that forward, let alone what the technology proficiencies we now have might allow. And so we've been talking a lot about this idea of hybrid learning. And for us, hybrid learning is the best of all the face-to-face pedagogy, all the educationally sound research approaches that we've been using for years and years, but now sort of thinking about how do I use flipped learning, blended learning, remote learning, and distance learning research to sort of think about what's the best of both these worlds look like. And that really looks like many sort of predating COVID technology-rich classrooms. Great pedagogy face-to-face, supported by amazing technology platforms that allow teachers to take it to a whole new level in terms of what they could do with collaboration. We know having a platform like Office 365 isn't enough. You've got to have great new approaches, and you've got to have great curriculum obviously wrapped around that. And so this is a weird expression, but if COVID was a piñata, what are the good bits that are coming out of it? What are the things that we might be able to take forward? So let me share some experiences with you about what we've seen globally and locally and things that we should think about. First thing we should do is celebrate you guys, and that's the educators around the world who have been doing an absolutely power of work to try and get these things online, to get classrooms up and running, to get technology working in their classrooms for kids. It has been a pretty tough time. But I think one of the real positives to come out of this, and the SAMA model will be something that's quite familiar to you, about the way that you use technology in a learning activity for substitution, augmentation, modification, or redefinition. One of the challenges that I have with this model, or at least the interpretation of this model, is that people consider substitution as bad. And one of the things that we now have as a reality for us in education is that most teachers can now be at substitution. And in the past, that was only maybe 30% of teachers who were even at that level to be able to use technology in a substitution kind of way. There are then, if everyone's at substitution, these are quite small, manageable steps that go up from there. But if you're not even at substitution, it's a massive leap to get into the technology realm. And if nothing else, one of the things we've seen is that many teachers have been doing a power of technology professional learning and learning out of necessity over the past few months. So we should have a pretty good place upon which to thrive. We also see some global trends in this space too. And so one of those trends is around, and we know that many schools have done this for many years, as a matter of fact, about 32 years since the first one-to-one classroom in the world. You know, we're seeing a trend back towards this idea of every student having a device for their learning. And we know there are many possibilities of how you can do that, how you can structure that. But there's lots of other different trends around there, thinking about, you know, special needs and accessibility, which I know the Using Technology Better team could help you with if you're interested in that, in terms of the Microsoft products and the way that they can help students who are emerging readers or who have processing issues or so on and so forth. But there's lots of different trends that are going on and coming out of this. One of the great things that we have seen, and this is from a brilliant educator who I know some of you might know, Pip Cleaves, who's based in New South Wales, and she's actually an assistant principal across 4 schools, and she's a sort of assistant principal of innovation. And one of the great things that she's been doing, and I know many of you have been doing, is really sharpening your focus on distilling down a strategy for example, blended learning in this case here, and thinking about if a teacher wants to do explicit teaching, which is part of a great blended learning approach, here's some ideas for you. And if you want to do student-directed learning, here's some ideas for you. If you want to do formative assessment, here's some ideas for you. And then it goes on to get a little bit deeper around those sorts of things. Think about how the tools, and it gives, you know, a great framework for the teachers in that school to keep coming back to and saying, what am I trying to do in my lesson? A bit of explicit, a bit of student-directed, a bit of formative assessment, reflect, and move on to the next lesson. And so we're seeing some schools who've put up amazing resources like this and have done a lot of thinking in supporting their teachers to be brought along on the journey of what great learning looks like in this environment. One of the other things I'll talk about too is the speed of innovation that we've seen as a result of this pandemic. And that's in two different fronts. The first one is, you know, large ministries or departments of education have really been moving faster than ever before. And so have industries. And the second, so for example, you know, Queensland Department of Education had a project running to roll out Teams as a platform for all of the schools, but that was about 2.5, 3 years in the making. And once this happened, 3 weeks that project was done. Now they threw a lot of man hours and people were working around the clock to sort of get it all done with the right policies and privacy and everything else they need to consider. But we should acknowledge that there's been a whole rapid transformation. Our CEO, Satya Nadella, talks about the fact that we've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months across every industry, across finance and banking and health and education and everything else. So we've really seen a massively rapid change. And we've started to see companies like us too start to ideate and start to iterate our products much more rapidly than before. So for example, the student wellbeing online thing became much more of an issue, or much more of a front of mind thing to think about during COVID. And so now there's an app that you can add into your Teams environment that allows students to sort of tell you how they're feeling. You can anonymize it by name. You can have their name shown only to you. But you know, there's an interesting opportunity for us to have some conversations with these kids down here and see how they're going, see how they're tracking. And the possibility within platforms that, you know, suddenly online presenting was more than just a video and a screen. We need to sort of ramp that up a bit and think about how it can be dynamic. So on the left-hand side there, you see some of these dynamic views coming to Teams calls very, very soon. On the right-hand side, you see something from Microsoft Whiteboard, because we realized that when people were in Teams calls, they started clicking on a little whiteboard icon and then going, oh, that's a bit sort of cut down, not a great experience. And within a month or a month and a half, a lot of the features out of the desktop version were brought into the Teams meeting experience because we realized that there were many users who wanted to have that higher functionality. When we start to think about you know, assisting teachers, this is another tool. This is the second iteration of something called Class Insights that is in Teams. And the first part of it was really just a timeline of what kids are accessing what documents at what time. And this is sort of getting into more suggestive analytics, sort of giving you some insight that you may not have known. You know, for example, Ella hasn't started her comedies of error task yet. If the tool in assignments within Teams knows that that's due on Thursday, but it also knows that she hasn't opened any of the templates that you attached as part of that task, then it can assume that she hasn't actually started the task. If this was a paper pen activity, you wouldn't know that. But this is sort of highlighting it to me as a teacher and saying, hey, maybe you might want to message the student. And so soon you'll be able to just click on that, message a student straight away and say, hey, how are you going with that task? There's lots of other uses of this sort of data coming into the platforms to make it easier for teachers to get some insights that otherwise would be difficult to uncover. If I think about innovation in teaching practice, I want to show you a couple of examples in the last 5 minutes. One is from a university called Case Western Reserve University in the United States. And they were involved with Microsoft using doing development on an app called Hollow Anatomy, which was really designed for the HoloLens, which is the sort of you know, the visor thing that allows you to see holograms in your environment, as you can see in some of the screenshots below. They've been working with us for about 3 or 4 years on the development of that. And when COVID hit, they realized that this is finally the opportunity to start putting that out there. And so they shipped 185 HoloLenses out to first-year anatomy students. And they basically taught, as you can see here in the pictures, this is a colleague of ours from Sydney named Lawrence, standing in his lounge room or his room in his house, actually overlaying the holograms across the top of his fingers and his hands live at 1 a.m. in the morning, while Professor Suwish-Baratz was taking them through their first year anatomy lecture via holograms live around the world. Now, the interesting part about this is, does it work? And so without any sacrifice in exam scores, they found that students learnt the anatomy didactics, the language, the parts of the body, etc., in 4.5 hours using this HoloLens experience versus 7.3 hours that it normally took when they go into a cadaver lab in a university. Students who supplemented a traditional cadaver learning experience with a HoloLens had an 80% improvement in retention, which is quite mind-boggling. And those who didn't even get into a lab because they were locked down in remote learning still had a 50% improvement in their ability to recall the right terms at the right time. Now, I don't think that any of us are saying for a minute that students in first year anatomy or any other medical degree shouldn't be having that real body cadaver experience in a lab. But what it does mean is that potentially there's cost savings here for institutions to think about, instead of that lab always being used by students who are doing first year medicine or first year anatomy or whatever it is, maybe we could use it for some of our research teams to get in, for some other year levels to come into those labs, because there's possibility of us using other technology to supplement the learning in this environment. So amazing findings from a lecturer who, Professor Suwish-Baratz, was actually quite a skeptic about the impact this would have, being worried about the less experiential idea of not using cadaver labs all the time. Another example that we've seen is, this is Dr. David Kellerman from University of New South Wales, and he's now started thinking about a different way to produce lectures online, knowing that he will be probably teaching to a more international audience, with more students potentially learning at UNSW from overseas, who physically may not get to Australia, but might want to be part of his engineering degree. And so what he's got there is a Surface Hub set up with a camera sort of pointing at the Surface Hub, and he now standing in front of the Surface Hub with his content behind him. And they've done research around the idea that this is a much more engaging experience than what you and I are doing today, which is me in a little box and my slides showing, is a little less personal than if I was actually standing in front of my content and working with it and gesturing. And a couple of reasons for that. One of the things that he can do is just flip his camera and go to the Surface Hub camera, which is the sort of whiteboard that he's writing on. Here's his OneNote notebook. He's doing some engineering tasks here. And you can see in the top corner there, he's switched his camera around to one that is right in front of him while he's facing the board, if you like. And so the other advantage of this too is that he can start doing his mathematical modeling in the background on his Surface Hub and his whiteboard, and then actually use physical models in the foreground. And we're starting to see an emergence of the production of online lectures, taking it to a new level based on lots of research around human engagement and so forth. Another example of the sort of higher ed space is at University of Wollongong. And so this is a machine that tests the tensile strength of substances in engineering. And unfortunately, these are very expensive equipment. They're often in labs where you can't fit a lot of students in. And so they've been able to do some work around turning that into a holographic experience, which means that you can be seen and used without it actually damaging the machine at all. But it is there in situ. So this is a really interesting idea that is going on in lots of universities at the moment. One of the other things we should celebrate, one of the last things we should celebrate, I suppose, is the tenacity of many of our students. And while we acknowledge that there are some students who really battled through this period, at one point there were 1.6 billion students not attending formal schooling because they were locked down somewhere around the world, unable to attend. We know that there were some challenges, but we also know that there were some really interesting learnings about the type of traits that students had who were able to thrive in this space. And so a couple of those ideas, students who found themselves with more choice and voice exceeded their, exceeded the expectations in terms of the way that they were able to actually collaborate with others. And they were really sort of thriving with the lack of teacher-centeredness, around the learning experience. And they were really doing amazing work when given enough rope to go. One of the key characteristics that came out of that or that was highlighted as a necessity for students to have, is something called self-regulation. Self-regulation is the idea that students know where they are in their learning at the moment, they know where they've got to get to, and they can actually navigate their way between those 2 points without a teacher intervening every 15 minutes saying, right, you should have done that now let's move on to this part. So because kids, and I certainly remember from my 12 years of teaching, that students learn pretty quickly how to play school. They wander into the classroom, you then recontextualize it for them, and then you tell them exactly what to do, where to find the stuff, what to do next. And when they just sort of follow along and play school, and they're all compliant and doing some good learning, but really they don't have any ownership. And so building muscle around self-regulation is definitely something that we see as a positive thing that we should do for all students. Now we're back together. So I think that we should be really quite optimistic about what has gone on. I know that it's been a really, really tough time, but there are some evidences of practice here that are really fascinating, and that we should not, the gravitational pull back to pre-COVID ways is going to be really strong. But I think we should take time, take stock, and start thinking about what are some of the great things that happened that we might be able to grab onto and build into our hybrid learning classrooms moving forward. So hopefully that was interesting input for you, and hopefully you have a wonderful rest of the session with the UTB team. And apologies again that Sean couldn't be here, but it was great that I was able to jump in and support. So thanks, guys.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Travis. I think that's really kind of opened up my eyes for sure around viewing this whole COVID experience with a different perspective, and really appreciate some of those benefits that have come out of it. So now, everyone, we're going to be moving into our different workshop sessions. So you'll see down the left-hand panel of your screen, you've got a little sessions icon that you can click into. And from there, you can then select your workshop options. So if you can now head to those different sessions, and your session presenters will meet you there.